where they did this very cool laser thing on the walls. Anyway, it's great to be back, and we're continuing in our Jewish history series. Last week we did World Perfect, about the impact of monotheism and morality. This is like the perfect flip side of that class. It's called Why the Jews, and it deals with the nice, light, cheerful topic of anti-Semitism. That was sarcasm. And I'm going to once again share with you guys, hopefully you won't have too many problems here, my screen, because I have a PowerPoint presentation there we go, that goes along with this. Let's see if we can do this. Here we go. No, we don't want that. We want to go up to the top, and we want to, sorry about that. My apologies. There we go. Okay. Dramatic entrance we need. So tonight we're going to be dealing with, it's actually this afternoon for you guys, it's tonight for me, I apologize, the nice light topic of anti-Semitism, which sadly is still with us. And we're going to see it's a very unique hatred, but this is a topic that is not simply philosophical, historical, interesting discussion. As I said, anti-Semitism is alive and well in the world. In the 1960s, there was a Harvard math professor by the name of Tom Lear. He's still alive. He's in his 90s today. He used to write these very funny satirical songs. And he has a song called National Brotherhood Week, about a week where everyone gets along for 1 week and then goes back to like hating and despising each other. And had a verse that went as follows.
All the Protestants hate the Catholics, and the Catholics hate the Protestants, and the Hindus hate the Muslims, and everybody hates the Jews, but during the Passion of Brotherhood.
And by the way, he's Jewish. He's not making fun of Jews. Probably half the audience is Jewish. But the question is why? And the why is, again, not just an interesting discussion in terms of history or philosophy, or because, like I said, anti-Semitism is alive and well in the world. If you follow the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL statistics, you'll see that anti-Semitism is at the highest levels it's been since the Holocaust, and Jews, who are less than 2% of the population of the United States, are the targets of 58% of hate crime, believe it or not. It's interesting point. So again, it's very much alive and well. We're seeing things in America that, as of the last couple of years, like shootings in synagogues that were unheard of in the United States. Hardly a new phenomenon in human history for Jews to be attacked, but we see that it's nowhere, it seems to be safe for us. So we need to get to the bottom of this phenomenon to understand what is really driving this hatred, so that we can be sure that what happened to the Jews between 1939 and 1945 in the Holocaust under Nazi Germany will never happen to us or our children or our children's children. Now, if you ask the experts, the historians, the anthropologists, like, why is there Jew hate? They'll generally give you one of 7 explanations for why Jews are hated. Number one is economics. We Jews are too powerful. We have too much control of money. Now we'll hear too much control of media. It's all part of the same accusation against us. This one is very much alive and well in the world today. Number 2 is chosen people. We think we're special or better. No one likes an elitist. Number 3 is our scapegoat. We're always in the right place at the wrong time. Blame the Jews for your problems. Number 4 is Zionism. And this one, of course, is also very much alive and well. It's Israel's illegitimacy, Israel's occupation, its apartheid walls, its treatment of the Palestinians. Number 5 is outsiders. We're different. We're a 5th column. Not only are we weird and strange, but we can't be trusted. A 5th column is a minority who is not loyal to you. Number 6 is deicide, the Christian accusation that we killed Jesus. And number 7 is the one used by the Nazis, which is race. We're a different and therefore inferior race. So I'm sure all of you have come across one or more of these, and possibly all of these, and pretty much any excuse you'll hear for why we're hated will fit into one of these 7 categories. But what we need to do is we need to distinguish between the causes versus the excuses. So let's first define our terms, cause versus excuse. So I'm sure some of you remember, I don't know if it's still around, the cartoon Calvin and Hobbes, but a funny cartoon about a very hyperactive, over-imaginative 7-year-old boy. Why didn't Calvin do his homework? And you can see Calvin is telling the principal all these crazy stories about dinosaurs and aliens and bullies. You can see the principal has clearly dealt with Calvin before and is not buying any of it. So these are all excuses. None of this has anything to do with why his homework wasn't really done, which we'll see in a minute. When we're dealing with anti-Semitism, by the way, we have to appreciate that literally millions upon millions of people will believe any number of things about us that have no basis in reality. But, we can't stop doing something we never were doing in the first place. We need to get to the cause. What's the thing we're doing or not doing or need to do differently that if we change that, anti-Semitism will go away? Which is why, in my opinion, this is one of the most important talks that every single Jew on the planet needs to hear, because anti-Semitism affects all of us. So we're going to run through our list now of these 7 explanations for anti-Semitism. We're going to look at them through the lens of fact and history. We're going to eliminate those that are excuses, and we'll be left with the cause. What is the real reason why we are hated? So let's begin at the beginning. Economic theory. Anyone know, I wish I was doing this live so I could get your live reaction, but anyone know when the first association of Jews and money begins? It's not something new. It goes back a long time. It goes back to medieval Europe. You can see these wood carvings, by the way, from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Notice, by the way, these are the sign that Jews wore in medieval Europe in the Renaissance was not a Jewish star, which has only been used as a Jewish symbol, by the way, for 500-600 years. Rather, it's the circle, which is not a bagel, it's a coin. And you notice here's the devil as a Jew with the coin sign with the Jewish nose, but look at those feet. He definitely is not Jewish with those feet. You could see medieval drawing depicts Satan with Jewish badge participating in deliberations of Jewish money. It's not just participating, he is Jewish. The association of Jews with money begins in medieval Europe in the 13th century when the Catholic Church outlawed usury, lending money at interest. Someone's got to do that, otherwise there's going to be no banking. So since the Jews were already going to go to hell for killing Jesus, which we'll get to in a few minutes, we may as well force them to lend money. But how do we know this isn't the reason why we're hated? A, we didn't choose to do it. We're forced into it. B, most Jews didn't lend money. C, when other like Italian bankers in the Renaissance ignored the church and lent money at 3 times the interest of Jews, no one went after them. But more than that, the real connection of Jews with money and power is much more recent. It begins at the very beginning of the 20th century in 1903 with the publication of the world's most famous forgery, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is supposedly the minutes of a meeting, a secret meeting that takes place once a century, where the rabbis and the heads of the Federation get together to plan the next 100 years of Jewish control of the human race. Now, how do we know this is a forgery? Besides, we know it's a forgery because it was written by the secret police of the Tsar of Russia, called the Black 100s. Scariest name for any police force I've ever heard of. Anyone who thinks that 10 rabbis in a room could agree on anything knows nothing about the Jewish people. But do you know, besides the Bible and maybe the Quran, there are more versions of this book in print than any other book on the planet Earth. It's even a bestseller in countries that don't have any Jews. I actually have a friend of mine is a Sephardi Jew who grew up in Japan. He said the Japanese buy this book like crazy, not because they're anti-Semitic, but because they believe it's true and they wonder how the Jews are doing it so they can copy it. But we know it's not even true. Because first of all, we see that poor Jews in history are hated as much as rich Jews. It doesn't make a difference what economic situation we're in. Today, Jews are very high income earning bracket, as we'll get to in a minute. But a great example to illustrate how the lack of truth of this whole accusation is in 1939, a month before the start of World War II, Adolf Hitler took a boat. He stuck almost 1,000 Jews on it. They made a movie out of it called The Voyage of the Damned. And he sent this boat off to the Western Hemisphere. He said, before you guys start picking on me in the Western world for being anti-Semitic, let's see how many Jews you want. You know what happened to the boat? It circled around, went to America, South Central America. No one took any of these Jews. It went back to Europe, and a lot of them died in the Holocaust. But more than that, today Jews in America are the highest income earning bracket in the United States. But that is a relatively new phenomenon. If you look at your grandparents, depending how old you are, your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, the vast majority of Jews 100 plus years ago were not wealthy people. They were poor. Like I said, poor Jews are hated just as much as rich Jews. And we know this isn't what's really bothering Hitler, because in 1935, Germany passes the Nuremberg laws. If you know the Nuremberg laws, Hitler came to power in 1933. The Nuremberg laws neutralize any Jewish influence. What percentage of Germany is Jewish, by the way, prior to the Holocaust? Really interesting. 0.6%, about a third of what it is in America. Okay, Jews were disproportionately successful, as we are everywhere. But the Nuremberg laws rob Jews of their bank accounts, their public office, their ability to have any influence, power, financially or politically, is taken away from them. So if the power of the Jews, supposed the threat they pose, is neutralized through legislation, why do we have to kill them all? Clearly in Hitler's mind, which is something we'll get to in a little while, this is not the threat they pose. But this whole notion of Jewish money and power is the reason for anti-Semitism is nonsense. Do people believe it? For sure, a lot of them do. But this is not the cause of anti-Semitism. Moving along to chosen people. Now, it's true that no one likes people who think they're better than other people. We Jews don't walk around, by the way, historically thinking we're better. But we do believe we were chosen, as I mentioned in last week's class, for unique responsibility. Okay, maybe that looking at ourselves having unique status in the human race could engender a certain level of hostility and animus. But you have to appreciate that when you get to the reform movement in Germany, which we're going to talk about in a few classes from now, reform movement wanted to eliminate differences between the Jewish minority in Germany. They dropped any mention of being a separate nation, of Israel, of Jerusalem. They said Germany is our Israel, and Berlin or Hamburg or Frankfurt is our Jerusalem. We're not Jews, we're Germans of the Mosaic persuasion. So they say, no, we're not different from you at all. We're totally loyal Germans. Does the hatred go away? Well, it goes to sleep for a while, and then it comes back even more violently than before. But more than that, everyone thinks they're chosen or special. I don't mean every individual person, but every nation, every religion. The red sun is in the center of the flag of Japan because they believe they're closest to the rising sun, the gods over the Pacific, which is what the word Japan means, the land of the rising sun. The word for China in Chinese means center of the world. And by the way, traditionally, the word for non-Chinese was monkey or barbarian, not very politically correct. Christianity and Islam both believe in what's called supersessionism, which is God chose the Jews, then he rejected the Jews, and he chose us instead. So every religion, every nation thinks they're chosen or special, but only we're picked on for it. And even when we drop the notion of being different or special, the hatred doesn't go away. That means it's like a doctor, like we're trying to treat COVID-19. We don't realize it's a virus. We think it's like, like medieval Europe. It comes from bad ether in the air. If you're doing it and you're waving incense around, thinking that'll get everyone better. If you're trying to treat the disease, but you don't know what the real cause because you're missing it, it doesn't go away. It means you're missing it. It's exactly what we're talking about here. This is not the cause of anti-Semitism. Okay, let's try scapegoat. By the way, where does the term come from, scapegoat? I'm sure a lot of you know. Yom Kippur. The Yom Kippur ceremony done in Jerusalem when the temple stood by the high priest thousands of years ago. He would place his hands on a goat, symbolically confess the sins of the Jewish people, and the goat, which would be sent off to what is today Male Adumim, and off a cliff. It's a symbolic act. So scapegoat, the goat didn't do anything. The goat's it's being sent away. It's taking the sins, but it didn't do anything itself. Scapegoating, by the way, is true. We are always scapegoating. There's truth to it. But the definition of scapegoat is what? Blaming someone who is blameless. It's always an excuse. It's always, and why do you do that? Why do you scapegoat someone? To divert attention from who's really to blame. Like Tsarist Russia, early 20th century, corrupt, inefficient, feudal system, ridiculous, peasants suffering. Oh, we'll blame the Jews. But we didn't do anything wrong. So scapegoating is always, is definitely connected to the Jewish people, but it's always an excuse. But when we look at scapegoating, we have to appreciate a certain aspect of scapegoating groups of people. Here's Hitler speaking at a rally in 1935. And he's a great speaker, by the way. He knows, even if you watch Hitler speaking in German, you don't speak a word of German. This is a man who knew how to get a crowd going. By the way, the banner in the back there is the byline of the Nazi newspaper Der Stürmer, which is "The Jews are our misfortune." That appeared on every single issue of the newspaper. from like 1933, 1945. But what's the crowd's reaction when Adolf Hitler is standing up there and ranting about how bad the Jews are for Germany? What's their reaction? They're cheering, yeah, this is great. After the rally, we go to the Brauhaus, drink beer, and beat up Juden. And I think it's great, but imagine he stands up and says, my fellow Germans, we have to fight against the enemy of not just the fatherland, but the world, the midgets. The midgets are our misfortune. Now what's the crowd thinking? Adolf is barking mad. He needs a uniform with sleeves that tie around the back, straight jacket, an office with no door handle on the inside and padded walls. Why, when they hear about midgets, do they think he's crazy, but they hear about Jews? Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Remember, Jews are 0.6% of the population of Germany. And the answer is, when you're going to scapegoat someone, you just don't want to pick someone randomly out of a hat. You want to ideally pick someone that people already love to hate. And what Hitler is building on is one of the scariest excuses for Jew hate in history, which is Christian anti-Semitism, specifically deicide. Deicide, deo in Latin means God, and side means to kill, like insecticide. God killing. Who are we talking about? We killed Jesus. This is my personal favorite. I'm being sarcastic here now. Just a little anecdote to tell you to break up the intensity of this. My great grandmother, my mother's mother's mother, bought a number of buildings in Brooklyn over 100 years ago. Very smart move, by the way. 2 apartment buildings and a 2-family house. My grandmother sold one of the apartments in one of the 2-family house, but she kept the apartment building, which my mother and her sister now own. But we lived in, when we were little kids, when I was a little kid, we lived in Brooklyn, which is in a really nice neighborhood. If you know Brooklyn, any of you, if you're originally from around there, possibly. We lived in Park Slope in Brooklyn. And the neighborhood was, at the time, now it's very Jewish. At the time, it was all Irish and Italian Catholic. We're the only Jews on the whole, like several blocks, which today in Brooklyn is almost impossible. And I remember, we used to play down, we went to a private school and everyone else went to St. Saviour's, a Catholic parochial school. And I remember that we used to play with this kid. My older brother is only 16 months older than I am. And we used to play with this kid down the street named Joseph Viglia. He was an Italian Catholic kid. I remember we'd play in his house and it was dinner time. And when it was time for dinner, his mother would say, Joseph, send the Christ killers home. It's time for dinner. Now keep in mind, I am 6 years old at the time. My brother was maybe 7 or 8. We were very close in age, but I still remember, it's one of the most vivid memories I have. It was his 7-year-old birthday and everyone on the street is invited to his birthday party except for my brother and I. And my brother's like, this isn't fair. Let's go see why we're not at the party. And I'm like, I don't want to see why we're not at the party. I did not want to go. He drags me down the street. He drags me into this guy's apartment building. We go up to the first floor. He was on the first floor. I am so scared. I'm standing on the stairs with my eyes at the level of the floor looking at this kid's door. My brother knocks on the door. You hear it suddenly get really quiet inside. They open the door like a crack and everyone you can see is behind Joseph Viglia. And my brother, who's a smart guy, today he's a doctor, my brother says, why don't you invite us to the party? And he says, oh, I'm sorry, we ran out of invitations. My brother's not stupid, even like 8 years old. He goes, come on, really? So they throw the door open to the house. What's there? This on the wall, like a Jesus on the cross. And he said, you killed our God. And he slams the door in my brother's face. And I go running home and hide under my bed. I'm so scared. Not only was I petrified they're going to come after me, but I couldn't make any sense of it. Not to insult any Christians, but I couldn't figure out at 7 years old, the closest thing I could think of God was Superman, and it took kryptonite to kill him. How did you kill someone's God with 2 boards and 3 nails? But this whole Christ killer thing is so ridiculous. Another aspect of it is really weird. When is Jesus born and when does he die? According to Christian tradition, he's born in the year 1, he dies in the year 32, whatever. When should the Christians be most angry at the Jews? Like right after his death or like 1,000 years later? Think about it, American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. Who wins? Sorry to bring it up to you guys in Florida, but they say Florida, the further north you go, the more south it gets. But we know the North wins, or at least most Northerners think they won. When are the South most upset at the North? 1866 or 2020? Clearly 1866. The war just ended. A lot of people are dead. The North is occupying the South. Imagine you land in, not Boca, but you land in Miami, and this is the sign you see at the airport. Welcome to Miami, Northerners not welcome. What am I talking about here, guys? Time dulls all pain. Now, granted, after Jesus' death, there was no Christianity. It only appears several centuries later. But what should have been the first item of business if they're so upset with us? Let's get those Jews. When does the accusation of Christ killer first appear and is first used to unleash massive anti-Semitism against Jews? At the time of the First Crusade, in the late 11th century, 1,000 years after the event. That is weird. But more than that, I don't know how much you know about Christian theology, but why was Jesus born and why did he die according to Christian thinking? Christianity doesn't have an idea of tshuva. You're born in sin, you die in sin. And the only thing that keeps you from going to hell is the fact that Jesus is the suffering lamb who died for your sin. And if he hadn't done that, we'd all, as my evangelical friends often say, we'd be getting a big barbecue. So if we did kill the guy, and I'm not being nasty, I'm just trying to point out a philosophical point, a logical point, then maybe we should be thanked for it, because if he hadn't, whatever. But if you look at the Christian Bible, the gospel, if you look at Matthew, John, Mark, not Luke, Luke's a different narrative, but you could see over and over again, it's the Romans, the Romans, the Romans. The Romans arrest him, the Romans flog him, the Romans try him, the Romans crucify him. Okay, according to the gospel in Matthew, there were some Jews involved in what was going on. Okay, we'll split the blame 50-50. We get all the blame, and they get the church named after them, the Roman Catholic Church. But more than that, in 1965, Pope Paul, in Vatican II, the most significant statement made about the Jewish people in 2,000 years, he said, number one, no Jew alive today, almost 2,000 years later, can be held accountable for what happened to Jesus 2,000 years ago. And only a few Jews had anything to do with that in the first place. So you can't blame the Jews. Remember, the Pope is infallible. He can't be wrong. So when the Pope forgives us for something we never did in the first place, which even according to Christian theology had to be done, and nothing changes, this is all excuses. It's all ridiculous. I'm not saying people don't believe it. My older brother, again, go back to him in fourth grade, his fourth grade teacher made a comment in the class, our elementary school class in New Rochelle, New York, which was so Jewish, we called it Jew Rochelle. She made a comment to the whole class, which was 90% Jewish, about the Jews killing Jesus. So people definitely believe this stuff. But when you get to Christian anti-Semitism, the level of insanity and illogicalness is mind-blowing. What's unique about kosher meat? Besides what kind of animals you can eat, you have to shech the animal and you can't eat any blood. So what are Jews accused of? Starting in 1144 in Norwich, England, you can see an image right here, of kidnapping a young Christian child, and then you see them making incisions in his body, and they're draining his body of blood. You see all the Jewish symbols on these people with the stupid hats that Jews were forced to wear. Why do Jews need Christian babies' blood? Now, don't answer yet. I know you're all going to say one thing. This is a multiple choice question, which, by the way, in Israel is called an American test, a Mivchan Amerikai. A, it's the chief ingredient in matzah. B, all Jewish men menstruate, need a monthly blood transfusion. C, all Jews as a punishment for killing Jesus suffer from hemorrhoids. The only known cure for hemorrhoids in medieval Europe is drinking Christian babies' blood. D, all Jewish boys, when they're circumcised, lose so much blood they have to drink Christian babies' blood to replenish the loss. What's the answer? E, all of the above. Ridiculous. By the way, this is called transference. As Freud or Jung, the psychoanalyst, would say. Transference is you always have a magnifying glass for what you think or your problems you see in other people. Why do I say it's transference? What's the central ritual in a Catholic Mass? I know most of you do not go to Catholic Masses ever. I went to one in my life when I was growing up with some friends. But the priest changes the wine and the wafer into the body and blood of Jesus. In the 13th century, the Fourth Lateran Council in 1214 announced this is not a symbolic act. When you eat that wafer, when you drink that wine, you are drinking Christ's blood and eating his body. So what are Jews accused of? You can see here, by the way, the graphic novel version of it in Schweizerdeutsch. This is in Switzerland. Here, the Jews break into the synagogue. Here, they steal those communion wafers, those crackers. Here they take them back to their synagogue. Notice the fake Hebrew. Here they're stabbing the crackers, which are screaming, and blood is pouring out of them. Now they're dividing them up to further torture them by burning them in the fire. But thank God the Christians come. The Jews are beheaded. They're tortured with hot tongs. They're burned alive. In the end, Jewish body parts are hanging off the church. That's pretty gross. The Jews are all dead. The host has been returned to the church, and the angels are singing. We hate the Jews because they torture crackers. Now, you might want to even laugh at that, but all the Jews in Belitz in Switzerland, over 1,000, were all forced into a giant wooden house. They were based on a confession that was pulled out of a guy through torture. They were all burned alive based on the accusation they stole crackers from a church. What's the animal that's most non-kosher in the world? The pig. So what's the animal always most associated with Jews? The pig. Here you can see these are images mostly from Germany. It's called Judensau. That's Martin Luther's church, the founder of Protestantism. This is an image that's on the bridge in Frankfurt outside the ghetto in Frankfurt, the Judengasse. It's no longer there. But look at this. This is incredible. They're always the same image. All these men are called rabbis. You notice the Jewish symbols. Notice the devil is a Jew. Here is a pig. Here is one Jew is suckling from the pig, and here the pig is defecating into the Jew's mouth, and he's eating it. Now imagine your thousands of Germans are seeing this image every day as they walk across this bridge in Frankfurt and right outside the ghetto. When Hitler stands up hundreds of years later and says the Jew is a subhuman vermin and has to be eliminated, he is building on centuries of the most irrational, deepest, superstitious, fearful hatred that there is. Okay, Jews are outsiders. Now, by the way, this is the main reason why we don't like anyone in this world. We do not like people who are different from us. And Jews have traditionally chose to look, dress, act, eat, and live differently than non-Jews. And maybe those differences would endanger a certain level of suspicion or hostility. But then we see that along comes Napoleon Bonaparte. And he, by the way, was the great emancipator of the Jews. And he will let the Jews out of their ghettos. And he will even send his emissary, Count Stanislav de Clermont-Tonnerre, to the Jewish community of France and to the Jewish, basically the Jews of Europe. He's making the same offer. He said, to the Jews as individuals, everything; to the Jews as a people, nothing. If you want to stay different from us with your own laws and your different everythings, don't expect to be citizens. But if you want to join us, be like us, and we'll give you all the rights and responsibilities that everyone else gets. He even convenes a great assembly of Jewish notables in 1806 and a great Sanhedrin in 1807, where he puts like 100 rabbis in a room and asks them all these questions about whether Jews can be loyal or not to French law, whether they can really fit in. These rabbis did a great job, by the way. Stick around. We're going to, in a future class, I'm going to show you the actual questions and the answers. They're really interesting. They did a great job of not really answering the questions, but it worked because Jews are emancipated. And what do? They run to assimilate, to drop their differences. This is a huge lesson we have to learn, by the way. You know, Jews are in Western Europe. This is Western Europe. Jews are becoming so much, especially in places like Germany, so much like the non-Jews. And since the reason they're supposedly hated is because they're different, they're totally assimilating. If you'd asked a historian or sociologist in 1850, what's going to be with anti-Semitism in 1950? He would have said there isn't going to be any anti-Semitism because there's not going to be any Jews. But we see one of the great weird supernatural aspects of anti-Semitism is by the way, we're hated just as much as when we're like the non-Jews, when we're different from them. But one of the most supernatural aspects of anti-Semitism we'll see is the greatest explosions of it have almost always taken place in places where we're most like the non-Jews and not most different from them. But Jews are assimilating. But then in the end of the 19th century, we have one little glitch on the radar screen, which was warning us that the notion of us assimilating would end anti-Semitism was not going to be the case. And it's the most famous trial in the 19th century in Europe, the Dreyfus Affair. The hero of our story is this man here. He's a 34-year-old French Jewish officer from Alsace-and-Lorraine named Alfred Dreyfus, completely assimilated Jew, completely loyal Frenchman. Now remember, France is the first country to grant Jews civil rights in the late 18th century. This is taking place 100 years later. Jews in France could not only join the army and go to university right away, they could become professors and become officers. In Germany, that took all the way to World War I for Jews they could join the army before, but to become officers in the army, only World War I. And Adolf Hitler, by the way, who fought in World War I and was a fairly brave soldier, he got his first Iron Cross, the highest military award given by Germany, from his Jewish commanding officer, by the way. Interesting side point. But Dreyfus was totally assimilated and totally innocent. But France, the government, the army, despite its enlightened openness, was still deeply anti-Semitic. He was framed using falsified evidence as a spy for Germany. He was publicly court-martialed. Here you could see him being court-martialed. They're breaking his sword. He was sent to Devil's Island off the coast of Brazil. You know, they made that movie Papillon. It takes place in the same place. He was brought back 2 more times, by the way, tried 3 times, found guilty all 3 times, even though the evidence was ridiculous, and eventually pardoned. And he stayed in the French army and retired as a colonel. But watching this trial is a 34-year-old Hungarian Jew living in Vienna, which was probably the most cultured city in the world, in the Western world at the time, a playwright and a journalist by the name of Theodor Herzl. And Herzl is shocked because in the public court-martial of Dreyfus, there's a lot of people watching this. What are they screaming? They're not screaming death to Dreyfus the traitor. They're screaming Amot Juif, kill the Jews. And Herzl writes in his diary, where is this happening? 100 years after Jews are emancipated in the most enlightened country in Europe. And for him, it's an epiphany, like the clouds open, he sees clearly a point that we all have to see, which is the major point of everything I've been doing until now. We can change ourselves into any shape we like to satisfy the ridiculous accusations of non-Jews. You hate me because I'm different, I'll become just like you. Does the hatred go away? No, ladies and gentlemen. It just changes its excuse and comes back from a different angle. And he, therefore, will not found but join the Zionist movement because all the early Zionists believed that the reason why there's anti-Semitism was there was no Jewish state. Because we're a stateless people with no army, no passport, no flag, no government, no one to protect us, no port of refuge. When we have those things, anti-Semitism will cease. By the way, Herzl died in 1904, 116 years ago. You can fast forward and you could laugh and cry at the same time, because not only has the founding of the state of Israel not proven to be the solution to anti-Semitism, today it is the #1 excuse for hating Jews in the world. I'm not just talking amongst Arabs. A lot of these images you see over here are Europeans all over the world, boycott Israel, Zionist, Nazi state, you name it. The whole thing is, of course, completely ridiculous. And it's based on this notion that Israel is an illegitimate state. Israel is a foreign occupier. Israel are Nazis. That's the weirdest accusation. Look at that, turning the six lines of a Star of David into a swastika. Is there anything more perverted than that? It's Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. It's Israel denying them a country. It's Israel's apartheid walls. It's all nonsense. How do we know that, by the way? And I'm not going to read these. You can read these quotes as I'm speaking. The Arab world was trying to destroy the Jewish state even before there was a Jewish state. These statements are made. Look at September 1947. This is Azam Pasha, Secretary General of the Arab League. And we know that from 1948, when Israel was, by the way, sanctioned to be a state by the United Nations, November 29, 1938, in the famous 48, excuse me, the famous 47, the famous UN partition vote. I apologize. One of the only useful things the UN has done for Israel ever was to vote to partition Palestine 33-13 with 10 abstentions. But even before Israel became a state, even before we occupied any territory, we were under attack. Constant terrorism, blockades, you name it. And by the way, Israel was a much smaller area. You can see had the Arabs accepted the partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, what would have been born along with Israel in 1947 and 48, excuse me, would have been an Arab state, but they rejected it in 1948, attacked Israel. And as a byproduct of that, Jordan illegally occupied Judea and Samaria, which is also called the West Bank. And Egypt illegally occupied Gaza. When I say illegally occupied, these are not parts of their countries, that their international borders are here and over here. There was no UN resolutions condemning either of those countries for 19 years. So the occupation is the root of all this anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. We're not occupying any territory. They have it. In 67, they try and kill us yet again. It was 48, then 67. Israel gets a hold of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol, who was the prime minister at the time, immediately says to the Arabs, we'll give the land back to you. Just make peace with us. What's the Arabs' world's response? No peace, no negotiation, no recognition. And that has more or less been the state. Now, thank God we've seen in the last few months, we've seen other Arab states starting to make peace. They're the countries that are not on our border, most of them. We have a cold peace with Egypt and Jordan. But guys, I don't want to do a class on the Middle East history, but it's never been about occupation. They hated us before. It's always been about the Arab world's inability to accept a Jewish state of any size. But certainly this is not the cause of anti-Semitism. Well, how about the racial theory one? This is the one used by Hitler. And it was based on the notion that Jews are a different and inferior race. You can see this pseudoscientific equipment because Jews clearly have smaller brains and they're physically weaker and they're genetically inferior. And these are these ridiculous caricatures of what Jews look like. The guy in the middle actually looks a lot like Mahmoud Abbas, I think. But this is all nonsense. There is no such thing as a Jewish race. We come in all size, shapes, and colors. I, by the way, told my children, I'm a big believer in mixing up the gene pool, and we shouldn't be. I told my kids when they're getting married, preferably married, don't marry Ashkenazim. If you want, it's okay, but ideally mix up the gene pool. I always jokingly say if you marry your first cousin for 400 years, you end up with Prince Charles. It's not so healthy. Hope there's no British people watching this. You'll be insulted. And thank God my kids listened. My my middle daughter got married first at 19 to a Yemenite boy. This is a Yemenite guy here. He's so dark, his nickname is Shoko, which means chocolate milk. I have beautiful mocha-colored grandchildren. Great for tanning in the Middle East. But anyway, I had another daughter and a son married a Yemenite, and I have a daughter who married a Moroccan. We're doing great so far. But that's not the point. The point is we come in all size, shapes, and colors. We're not a race. Anyone can join the Jewish people. This whole thing is ridiculous nonsense. Put it all together, guys. You can cross it all out. None of this has anything to do with reality. I mean, as if, okay, Jews are economically powerful today, a little bit fine, but it doesn't make a difference. Go back 1,000 years, we're dirt poor and completely disenfranchised. Not only does none of this have anything to do with reality and they're all excuses, none of it has anything to do with Judaism. You notice there's like nothing Jewish about hating Jews. It's about being different, about having too much power. It's about, what's the most famous diary from the Holocaust? The most famous diary from the Holocaust is Anne Frank. Now, Anne Frank, I'm sure many, if not all of you, have read the Diary of Anne Frank. It's the most read book about the Holocaust there is. Was a German girl whose family fled to Holland when Hitler came to power because the father, Otto, had business dealings in Holland. They ended up hiding in an attic for 2 years when the Nazis invaded Holland. A month before the end of World War II, pretty much, she was caught in Holland, very close to the end of the war. She died a month before. It was before a month before she was caught, but she died a month before the end of World War II in April of typhus in Bergen-Belsen. And her diary survived and was found by her father after the war and printed. And now it's been printed in almost every language on the planet Earth. It's the biggest selling book about the Holocaust. Now, Anne Frank is not a religious girl. She has limited Jewish knowledge. And look what she writes about anti-Semitism at 12 years old. Who knows, it might even be a religion from which the world and all peoples learn good, and for that reason and that reason only do we now suffer. We can never become just Netherlanders or just English or representatives of any country for that matter. We will always remain Jews. Wow. She's saying it has everything to do with us being Jewish, which has nothing to do with what we've heard so far. Now, by the way, the Diary of Anne Frank was made into a Broadway show. You have to turn the diary into dialogue. There's no way that a playwright is going to put such a heavy Jewish line into the play. So here's how it appears in the Broadway show. Well, one day it's one group and the next day another. That's it. 6 million Jews, 1.5 million children slaughtered by industrialized mass murder because Hitler was just sitting there one day going, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and now it's time for the Juden to go. Give me a break. There's got to be something more going on here. So let's switch gears and start focusing in the time we have left on, first of all, what makes anti-Semitism unique? And number two, what is the real cause based on our understanding, the Jewish understanding? Now that we understand those excuses are not what's causing the hatred. So first of all, I have to appreciate that anti-Semitism is different. Look at Dr. Bernard Lewis, who just died last year at 102 years old, professor emeritus from Princeton University. Hatred of Jews has many parallels and yet is unique in its persistence and its extent, its potency and its virulence. Its terrible final solution. Conventional prejudice and persecution can be very terrible, but they differ from anti-Semitism as does conventional from nuclear war. We don't have a monopoly on being hated. There's a lot of racism and intolerance in this world. But there are aspects of anti-Semitism that set it apart from other hatreds. Beginning with the word, by the way. What does the word anti-Semitism mean? You can't use a word unless you can define it. Anti means against Semitism, Semitic people, or Middle Eastern people. I've had Arabs tell me that I'm the anti-Semite. They're Middle Eastern. I'm a Pole. My family's from Poland. I'm a religion, not a race. I hate them. I'm an anti-Semite. That's all ridiculous, twisting of reality. The word was created by a German Jew hater named Wilhelm Marr in 1879 in a book that he wrote called The Victory of Germandom Over Judaism. You can see the cover of the book there, and there's a picture of Marr himself over there. After Darwinian evolutionary theory came out in 1858, racial theory started to emerge out of it, and Marr wanted to make hatred of Jews sound more racial and scientific and less religious, so he coins the phrase anti-Semitism. By the way, in every dictionary in the world, it means prejudice or hostility towards Jews and Jews alone. If you hate an Arab, you are not an anti-Semite. And by the way, it remains until today the only form of racial or religious intolerance that has its own word to describe it. If you hate a black person, what are you? A racist. You hate an Asian, what are you? A racist. You hate a Christian, what are you? There's no word for it. Only Jew hate has to have its own word to describe it. That should get us thinking there's something unique about this hatred. And there's a lot of unique things about Jew hate, beginning with Edward Flannery. You can read the quote as I'm speaking, but he's a Catholic priest who wrote this book called The Anguish of the Jews. And what he's pointing out is that the uniqueness, one of the unique aspects of anti-Semitism is it's the longest recorded hatred in human history. When Thames Television in England did a whole multi-part documentary on anti-Semitism, the title was Anti-Semitism, the Longest Hatred, because I can show you examples of it going back to the book of Genesis. It's like 3,700 years old. Number two that sets anti-Semitism apart is the universality of it. Unlike other hatreds, hatred of us is not limited to our relationship with one ethnic group, religion, country, or race. Wherever we have gone in significant numbers, it has followed us, which is why Tom Lear in that song wrote, this group hates that group, but everyone seems to hate us. Number three that sets it apart is the intensity. The dictionary definition of anti-Semitism might be prejudice or hostility towards Jews, but would that were all it was. Imagine if the worst thing that ever happened to a Jew is he didn't get into a country club or couldn't get into a university or be led into a restaurant. Those things happened to Jews, by the way, in the beginning, up to the mid-20th century. But it's much worse than that. Anti-Semitism was one unendingly long list of incredibly intense hatred, of violence, persecution, physical and economic marginalization, ghettoization, expulsion, rape, pillage, up to what's the worst thing you can do to people you hate? Kill them. What do you call killing a nation or killing a people? Genocide. Sounds like an ancient word. It's not. It was invented by a Polish Jewish refugee in 1944, Dr. Raphael Lemkin. Lemkin was fleeing from Poland to England during the Holocaust. He gets to England and he writes, he, by the way, is the father of the idea of crimes against humanity. It's his idea originally to come up with that. But he says, there's a crime happening in Europe, there's no word to describe, and he invents the word genocide, because even that word had to be created to describe the unique intensity of anti-Semitism. The last thing that sets it apart is the irrationality. Think about it. You know, you ask a white supremacist to put on a whiteboard why he doesn't like black people. He'll put 4 or 5 horrible things black people supposedly do. But you ask Jew haters to put on a whiteboard why they hate Jews, they'll fill up 15 whiteboards. We hate Jews because they're capitalist, communist, warlike, passive, different, the same, strong, weak, rich, poor, dominant, lazy, servile, aggressive. What's weird about our list? A, it never ends, and B, it contradicts itself. Professor Michael Curtis at Rutgers University, he said it the best. Anything and everything is a reason to hate the Jew. Whatever you hate the Jew is that. What? But guys, put it all together, and this is pretty scary. If you look in back of the logo for this presentation, there's a really long, unending list of excuses for hating Jews. By the way, some of the biggest experts in the world would stop at this point and say, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there is no real cause. It's just like a psychological, it's like a mental disorder, anti-Semitism, or, you know, we just got to try and convince non-Jews that we don't do all these things. The problem with that is it's not an answer. And despite all our attempts to show non-Jews we don't do these things, it doesn't seem to be working. Like I said, anti-Semitism is shooting up now. So let's now, in the few minutes we have left, switch gears and let's look at anti-Semitism from the Jewish perspective, all excuses aside. And we're going to do this in a very unusual way, not by looking at so many Jewish sources, but by looking at it through the eyes of the greatest modern, when I say modern, of the last 100 years, Jew hater. Who's that? Adolf Hitler. And we make 2 big mistakes with a guy like Hitler. Number one is we call him crazy. Now, Hitler was probably more neurotic than most people. He was a crazy vegetarian, by the way. He was a freak animal loving kind of guy, you know, interesting. He had all kinds of interesting quirky things about his personality, but he's not crazy. I'll tell you something as a historian. To do greatness in this world, be it great good or great evil, you have to have great potential. Whether you want to be a Stalin, a Lincoln, or you want to be a Churchill or a Lincoln, you know, on one hand, or a Stalin or a Mao Zedong or Hitler on the other, you got to have great potential. Hitler is a man of great potential, albeit evil. So don't write him off in that sense. Number 2 is we tend to think people like Hitler are not serious. And I say the opposite is true. Again, as a historian, I will say that leaders in democratic countries are less consistent because they have to get reelected and they will change their tune. They'll say one thing one day and a year later they'll change another year. People like totalitarian leaders don't care what you think. If you disagree with them, they kill you. They tend to be much more consistent. What Adolf Hitler thinks about Jews is remarkably consistent from the first things he writes in the early years when he enters politics, even 1920s, so the minute before he puts a bullet in his head in his bunker in Berlin in April of 1945. We're going to look at a series of quotes now, just a few. These are not from the famous Hitler propaganda book that you all know, which is called Mein Kampf. That was he wrote when he was in prison after a failed coup in Germany in the 1920s. These are from three books: Hitler Speaks, Hitler's Apocalypse, and Hitler's Table Talk. By the way, on my website, I'll show you the link at the end. I have a whole reading list there on books about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, including many of the books I'm mentioning now. If you want to check them out on your own, you can just go to the reading list. But these are books that are often written by people like Hitler's personal secretary, Martin Bormann. Martin Bormann recorded all the conversations that Hitler was having in his inner circle, not with the masses where he has to propagandize, but what's really going on in his head. And look what Hitler's saying. The struggle for world domination will be fought entirely between us, between Germans and Jews. All else is facade and illusion. Behind England stands Israel, and behind France and behind the United States. Even when we have driven the Jew out of Germany, he remains our world enemy. And Hitler didn't think he was fighting Jewish armies, but he thought on a political level, in terms of control, economics, the Jew is the big enemy. Now, by the way, Hitler, to show you how intellectual he is, don't get me wrong, an intellectual, someone just practices what he preaches. He might be very warped in his thinking, but in 1944, remember, this is Stalingrad. He lost the Battle of Stalingrad. The Soviet army is now on the advance, pushing the German army back. The German army is taking massive losses and being threatened by this massive Soviet onslaught. Hitler has two choices here. Take trains and send soldiers to the Eastern Front to try and stop the advancing Soviet army, or take those trains, forget that, and let's send 500,000 Hungarian Jews to their death in Auschwitz in the fall of 1944. Now, militarily, what did he choose to do? He chose to kill the last great Jewish community of Europe, the Hungarian Jewish community. Militarily, what would we call that? Stupidity and suicide. But intellectually, ideologically, if you think the Jews are your greatest enemy, he's being consistent. He goes on to say, do you now appreciate the depth of our National Socialist movement? That's the real term for Nazism, by the way, National Socialism. Can there be anything greater and more all-comprehending? Those who see in National Socialism nothing more than a political movement know scarcely anything of it. It is more even than a religion is the will to create mankind anew. Notice Hitler doesn't think small. He thinks big and he thinks wide. Nazism is a hashkafa, as we'd say in Judaism. It's a worldview. It's not just a political ideology. He says, they refer to me as an educated barbarian. Yes, we are barbarians. We want to be barbarians. It is an honorable title to us. We shall rejuvenate this world. This world is near its end. By the way, the Nazis glorified, they glorified two things: the Roman Empire, pre-Christianity, the pagan Roman Empire, and German Teutonic stuff. Like you watch these Viking shows on TV all the time now. Odin, Vili, V, Valhalla. They loved Wagner, the Ride of the Valkyries. Dun, 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 dun. They loved that stuff. So barbarian, yeah. But notice how he's talking about himself. We make another huge mistake, because this is what Hollywood does, messing up so many things. Our concept of love, but also our concept of evil. Evil in Hollywood is Bullwinkle, is Boris Badenov. Remember the cartoon? It's Voldemort and Saruman and Darth Vader. Evil is black. Evil's henchmen are black. Evil has nefarious evil things it wants to do in the world. Evil is not that way in real life. Evil looks like you and I. Evil has the same issues we have to deal with in life, raising our kids and everything else. And evil thinks it's doing good. Look what Hitler says. Providence has ordained that I should be the greatest liberator of humanity. I am freeing man from the restraints of an intelligence that has taken charge, from a dirty and degrading self-mortifications of a false vision called conscience and morality, and from the demands of a freedom and a personal independence which only a very few can bear. Hitler thinks he's saving the world. Evil people think they're saving the world. Good people think they're trying. Evil people are sure they're saving the world. But look what he says he's saving the world from: a false vision called conscience and morality. Look at the next quote. It's a mind-blowing quote. I love this one. I mean, it's unbelievable. He says, the 10 Commandments have lost their validity. They're not valid anymore. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. Whoa. This is the greatest backhanded compliment ever given to the Jewish people, who, by the way, went after circumcision first in history. We just had the holiday last week, the Greeks, Hanukkah. Hanukkah was not the Greeks trying to destroy Jews. It was the pagan Greeks trying to destroy Judaism. It was paganism's war on the only monotheistic faith. That is such an important point, because that's what Hitler's really about. And the next quote I'm going to show you is one of the last Hitler quotes we're going to look at, but it's the most important. This is not a Hitler quote. This is the words of the Hitler Youth song that every kid in Germany is singing between 1933 and 1945. Look at the words of the song. Look at the last 7 words. I believe the last 7 words are the 7 most important words to understand not just the Holocaust, but to understand ultimately on the deepest level all of anti-Semitism. We are the joyous Hitler Youth. We don't need any Christian virtue. Our leader is our savior, meaning Hitler. The Pope and rabbis shall be gone. We want to be pagans once again. Whoa. Not even hiding it, and no one pays any attention to this song or this quote. Now, I'm not going to even read this quote because it's complicated, but I'll explain what he's talking about. Hitler says that nature is brutal, but nature is balanced. So we talked about this in the last class, in the World Perfect, that when the lion hunts, he doesn't go after the alpha male of the wildebeest. He goes after the sick, the babies. Lions are natural. Nature is brutal. Babies get eaten by the crocodiles and everything, you know, that when they're trying to cross the river there and the migrating wildebeest kind of stuff. He said the world used to be that way also. Superpower countries like the Roman Empire just conquered it. They did not conquer someone because they didn't feel. Anyone they could conquer, they conquered. He called that the natural concept. And like we saw last presentation, World Perfect, a baby with even a minor birth defect was left out to die. Handicapped people weren't allowed to live. Today, the world is governed by what Hitler calls the human concept. The human concept is like a safari park where the lion's given a steak every day instead of having to go to hunt. What if you take a lion, raise it in a safari park, and release him back into Africa? What happens to the lion? He becomes lunch because he's forgotten how to be the lion. Today, the world's like that. Today, superpower countries don't gobble up their little teeny neighbors. Like, you know, Germany gobbles up Holland. It could have done that anytime it wanted to. Such a small country. You know, America could gobble up Canada. Mentally handicapped children are allowed to live. By the way, the Nazis practiced eugenics to a much higher level. They gassed German handicapped people. When the Germans found out about it, they were outraged, by the way. You should know this was a big movement, eugenics. California in the 1930s forcibly sterilized, not our topic. I don't know, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 mentally handicapped people were forcibly sterilized in California in the early 20th century. The Germans took it just one step higher. But he said, now the world has been destroyed by this natural concept. The lions forgot how to be a lion. This is not what the way nature wanted. This is the worst thing for the world. This is going to destroy all of the human race. And who's responsible for it? The Jews, and not just the rabbis and not just the synagogues, every Jew. Look what he says now. If only one country, for whatever reason, tolerates a Jewish family in it, that family become the germ center. De Belsenhard, it's a good word to know today. That's the German word for basilicus or bacteria. That family become the germ center for fresh sedition. If one little Jewish boy survives without any Jewish education, with no synagogue and no Hebrew school, it's in his soul. Even if there had never been a synagogue or a Jewish school of the Old Testament, the Jewish spirit would still exist and exert its influence. It has been there from the very beginning, and there is no Jew, not a single one, who does not personify it. Recognize a lot of those Jews there? Some interesting ones there, some famous ones. Every single Jew has this unique Jewish soul power, I had to do a whole class on this. I'm not doing it for you guys, but go watch on my website, the presentation Driven, and you'll understand it. Driven, watch it, it's really good. And he says, if you let any Jew survive like bacteria, it'll just spread from one to another, multiply, and the whole world will be infected by this unnatural thing which will destroy the world. Hitler comes to, therefore, an evil but very logical conclusion. No mercy, you got to kill every Jew. Unbelievable. What's interesting, and he goes on to say, one second, Hitler goes on to say, by the way, he says the heaviest blow which ever struck humanity was Christianity. Bolshevism is Christianity's illegitimate child. Both are inventions of the Jew. He says to get rid of, Hitler hated, he's very anti-Christian, by the way. He never survived long enough to go after the church, but he hated Christianity. He hated communism. He called those the bastard children of Judaism. To get rid of the bastard children, you just have to kill off the priests and burn down the churches and kill off Stalin and kill the commissars. And then these people all become pagans again. But to get rid of the mother of the bastard children, which is Judaism, you can't just burn down synagogues and kill rabbis. Every Jew has it in his soul, so every Jew has to die. What's interesting is the comment made by the rabbis in the Talmud. When did we Jews become a nation? We became a nation in a very unique set of circumstances, historically and geographically. Everyone else becomes a nation, like the French become a nation by living in France as different peoples, and then after a long period of time of shared cultural experience and historical experience and a common piece of real estate, they merge into the French national identity. We Jews become a nation outside our national homeland, in the desert, having been slaves, when we stand at a mountain, which is not part of our territory, and we pledge allegiance not to a flag, but to a certain vision of values based on a certain ideology that comes from God, the Torah. And that place is Sinai. And in Hebrew, the word is Sinai. The rabbis in the Talmud say something fascinating. They say, don't read it as Sinai, read it as Sin'ah, hatred. At Mount Sinai, anti-Semitism was born. It is hatred of the messenger because of the message he carries. And by the way, as Abraham Joshua Heschel, a Jewish philosopher, said, it's a great quote. He said, the Jewish people are a messenger that have largely forgotten the message. Even if the messenger is unconsciously aware of the message as an assimilated Jew, he still carries within him that unique Jewish personality and drive in his soul. Hitler sees it. He says, every Jew has to go, which is why he didn't care if a Jew converted to Christianity or even married out, he'd still come after you. Hermann Rauschning, who was a Nazi, became an anti-Nazi. You can read the quote as I'm speaking. I'm not going to read the whole quote to you, but he says the exact same thing. And he fled Germany in the 1930s and came to America. But he said this is what drives anti-Semitism, the eternal call to Sinai against which humanity again and again rebels. It's an intrinsic part of Western culture, the Judeo-Christian ethics, that which is basically Jewish ethics. That's what Hitler is going after. We saw this in last week's class, World Perfect, that our job has been not to convert the world, not to conquer the world. We don't have empires as Jews. The only Jewish empire in history, like I said before, is Hollywood, and it hasn't been a source of Jewish values. Our job is to lead by example, to live and act individually and collectively and inspire people and draw them towards a relationship with God. And those values that we all see, that are utopian values of justice and freedom and social responsibility and value of life and all these things, all come from this one God and this one absolute standard of morality, which is the national historic mission of the Jewish people. T.R. Glover, the historian, a very famous historian from a long time ago, he said it perfectly. He said, the way I'm paraphrasing him, but we lost the battles, but we won the war. We fought off the Greeks. It took us 25 years, but we maintained a century of autonomy after we've managed to stop the Greeks from destroying us. But then the Romans came, and it's been all downhill since then till the rebirth of Israel. So we lost the battles, but we won the war. The war we won was not a physical war. The war we won was an ideological war. We managed to eliminate the paganism and the moral values that came from it from much of the world and much of the governmental ideas of the modern world today. And that's an incredible victory, given we were people. The beauty of the story of the Jewish people is that a history with no power had the power of ideas to so transform the world. And Hitler saw that. And like we saw in last week's class, John Adams sees the power of the Jewish people to transform the world. In spite of Bolingbroke and Voltaire, who insist the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. And he goes on to talk about all the incredible things we've done. You know, we've influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. Paul Johnson, the famous British historian, in his book in 1987, he talks about how certainly the world without the Jews would have been a radically different place. And all the values we gave the world, without the Jews, it might have been a much emptier place. Ladies and gentlemen, Hitler, reading these quotes, John Adams, Paul Johnson, would he agree or disagree with them? He would basically agree with them. What's the difference between Paul Johnson and John Adams on one hand and Adolf Hitler on the other? They all see the fact that the power of the teeny tiny Jewish people to transform the world with ideas that are so powerful, and ideas are the most powerful thing in the world, more powerful than armies. The difference is not what they see, it's how they react to it. John Adams and Paul Johnson, because they buy into it, they think it's the best thing that's ever happened. Hitler thinks it's the worst thing that's ever happened. Ladies and gentlemen, Adolf Hitler is not evil because of his understanding of the Jews. Adolf Hitler understands what Jews are better than a lot of Jews understand what Jews are. He's evil because of his reaction to it. That's the powerful point. Here's the quote you want to take away with you. We're going to go for just a couple more minutes, a few minutes over. Hang with me. We're very close to the end. I highly recommend everyone get a copy of this book. It happens to be, I'm a big fan of Dennis Prager, first of all, but it happens to be the same title as this presentation, Why the Jews, and happened to come out in the same year, but there was a complete coincidence as this presentation came out. But they write, and this is what you want to take with you, guys. From its earliest days, the raison d'etre, the reason for being of Judaism, has been to change the world for the better. This attempt to change the world, to challenge the gods, religious or secular, of societies around them, and to make moral demands upon others has constantly been a source of tension between Jews and non-Jews. We now understand why so many non-Jews have regarded the mere existence of Jews, no matter how few, as terribly threatening. The mere existence of Jews with their different values and allegiances constituted a threat to the prevailing order. We have been dragging the world, kicking and screaming, for thousands of years towards a vision of values based on one God. And anti-Semitism, regardless of all the excuses it hides behind, is always a rebellion against that national historic mission. And Prager and Telushkin, in their book, Why the Jews, they call the Jews the canary in the coal mine. Remember, miners used to bring canaries into mines 100 years ago because there was gas in the mine you couldn't smell that would kill you before you even know it was there. And the canary is more sensitive and it would die first. So a poly peels over in the perch, get out of the mine quick. He says, that's exactly the Jews today. Show me how a country treats its Jews and I'll tell you all about their values and their democracy. Countries where Jews are treated well are generally stable, liberal, democratic countries. Countries where Jews are being persecuted or starting to be persecuted are countries that are either totalitarian or moving towards totalitarianism. And George Gilder, in his amazing book, he's not even Jewish, the Israel Test, he said that Israel is the Jew amongst the nations. Show me what a country thinks of Israel, and I'll tell you all about their human rights and their values. It's not an accident that Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, North Korea hate Israel. When evil comes into the world, it will target the Jewish people, and you can test this like gravity. I'm telling you, it's unbelievable. When you see anti-Semitism starting to explode, it's a big wake-up call. And Friedrich Nietzsche, just to close with this idea, Nietzsche had a great line, and he was often accused of being anti-Semite. He did not like Christianity. I do not believe he was an anti-Semite, but he said a human being can survive anyhow as long as he has a proper why. People will go through tremendous pain, suffering, and even sacrifice their lives if they appreciate and value what they're suffering or dying for as being meaningful, like your country, your flag. Any of us who are Jews today are only Jews today because for generations we had ancestors and relatives who suffered, were expelled and beaten and persecuted and raped and burned at the stake and driven from their countries. And even when they're being killed, the last thing out of their mouth was Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, because they appreciated that there was things more important than life itself. But what is potentially super destructive to individual Jews is the opposite of the Nietzsche quote here, which is take a Jew who is ignorant of Judaism, has no Jewish pride and no understanding of what our mission is, expose that Jew to anti-Semitism, and that Jew will probably decide that the best solution is to assimilate. And that is a tragedy for a number of reasons, which I just want to close with now, with one example here. Imagine, now a lot of you are parents and grandparents, maybe some of you are great-grandparents, but I always use this using this example on college kids who aren't parents yet. But I say, imagine you have a really cute girl with flaming red hair, you send her off to preschool. The first day of preschool, she goes off to preschool. She comes home crying hysterically. Mommy, Daddy, everyone made fun of my hair. They called me Carrot Top and Rudolph the Red-Headed Reindeer. So this is parent effectiveness training, PET. What are you going to do for your kids? First of all, you're going to give your daughter a big hug and a big kiss and tell her she's beautiful, she's special, don't listen, you're amazing, you got a great future as a stop sign, anything positive. What's the one thing you're definitely not going to tell your daughter? Dye your hair. There's something wrong with you. The biggest mistake we could make as Jews individually is to think we got to escape Judaism, because that means you break the chain and everything our ancestors did to get us here is for nothing. And the world needs Jews for Judaism. But more than that, like I said before, it doesn't work. I don't know what the algorithm is and what the number is, but like I said before, the greatest explosions of anti-Semitism have always taken place in places where Jews are most like the non-Jews, not most different from them. That's true in Egypt 3,300 years ago before the Exodus. It's true in Spain before the expulsion in 1492. It's true in Poland before the Khmelnytsky massacres in the 17th century. And it's certainly true in Germany before the Holocaust, where no one was more German than German Jews. That would be a disaster. Guys, on a macro level, I'm really not so worried. You know, like we have outlasted all these people. I made a t-shirt about, oh, where's my t-shirt? Oh no, where'd it go? Oh, it went to the wrong place. Let's go over here. I'm going to hold 1 second, guys. I put this in the wrong place. I got to put this up here. Here we go. Okay, sorry. I put my image in the wrong place. This is a t-shirt I made that sold at all the gift stores in Israel. It says civilizations, nations, and empires have tried to destroy the Jewish people and their status today. And it goes through all, and this is only the short list. You know, as Mark Twain said it, you know, we saw them all, we beat them all. And look at the bottom. It says the Jewish people, the smallest of nations, with a friend in the highest of places. So be nice. If any of you want one of the shirts, go to my website. For you, my friend, special price, as we say in the Middle East. But guys, on a macro level, I know we're going to survive, the Jewish people. But how many of us will be there at the end? You know, that's the problem. That's up to us. That's the big decision. We got to take to heart a great quote from Rav Chaim of Volozhin, and this is the final image of the presentation, I promise. Rav Chaim was one of the great rabbis of Europe, beginning of the 19th century. The Volozhin yeshiva is named after him, or he's named after Volozhin, but he was the head of the yeshiva. He said, when Jews don't make Kiddush, Gentiles make Havdalah. And he doesn't mean literally. I'm sure probably all of you watching know what Kiddush and Havdalah are. The two ceremonies made on wine. One is made as we go from the normal 6 days of the week to the higher spiritual level of Shabbat. We make Kiddush. When we leave Shabbat Saturday night and go down to the normal week, we make Havdalah. He doesn't mean it literally. It's meant to figuratively. Our job in this world, guys, is not Tikkun Olam. That's a misreading of Judaism. It is a part of Judaism, but people tend to take it the wrong direction. Our job in this world is not Torah and mitzvahs. Those are super important, but they're a means to an ends. The job of the Jewish people is Kiddush Hashem, like I said, to live and act in a way that inspires the world. If we don't do that, you know, there's a great expression in physics: nature abhors a vacuum. Vacuums don't like to exist. Vacuums will be filled with something if they have a chance to be filled with something. Either we, or the Jewish people, will live up to our national historic mission and fill that vacuum of values with values that come from God, or the opposite values will fill the vacuum. The opposite values are evil. When evil comes into the world, it will target the Jewish people first. So the greatest lesson we have to take away from this whole presentation is, before we deal with the issue of why the Jews, we first have to deal with why be Jewish. We have to make sure that ourselves, for sure, but our children, our friends, our family, the Jewish people, have to appreciate what being Jewish is about. They have to understand who we are, what our mission is, and the power of our ideas. The world needs now more than ever Jews for Judaism as role models for the human race. And when we have that vision of values, we don't have to spend all this money making Holocaust museums and convincing people of all the things. We're not doing this or that. If we have Jews for Judaism who are bringing the Jewish values that have so transformed the world more into the world, then we can truly transform that world. And then the world will not only stop hating us, they'll line up behind us and they will back us, support us, and follow us, because it's our job to lead the world back to that relationship and to create, as we saw in the last week's presentation, elevate the human race to the highest moral, spiritual level humanly possible. And then when we do that, we get an end to Jew hate, an end to Israel bashing. We get peace for ourselves and for the whole world. And we should merit to see that soon and in our days. And thank you very much. There's my website, kenspiro.com. Again, all my content is online for free, including this presentation. I apologize for going about 7-8 minutes over, but there's a lot of stuff I put in there. I hope you enjoyed it. And we're going to start next week, God willing,